Well, good morning. Yeah, oh, absolutely, yes. So many people ask me and comment on how wonderful it must be to be as tall as I am. And I say, yeah, it's got its benefits, but every now and again it creates some challenges, and this is one of them. The distance between the mouth and the microphone, okay? And I can't walk over here because we're recording things, so I'll try to do my best. But please, and I say this very sincerely, if I start to fade away or drop off or whatever it is, and you have a hard time hearing me, just kind of wave or do the ear thing, so I can make sure that everybody's hearing what I'm putting out here today. Well, Terry, I need to disagree with something that you said. After hearing the way Bruce introduced me, I do think he is quite smart. So, yeah, I don't quite follow that there. So, thank you, Bruce, for your introduction. Well, I'm really excited to be here today and to share some of my observations, some of our work with the IARP that we've done with schools and school districts across the country. And in my capacity as an instructor and a consultant for the IARP, I get the unique and wonderful and quite often humbling opportunity to work with schools, to go into schools, where the rubber meets the road, I like to say at times, and really help people move forward with their implementation and also sustaining, the work that they're doing. And although no two change initiatives or any organization that goes about implementing restorative practices, it's not going to be the same. But we have certainly noticed some commonalities or some common themes that seem to be, something that you can expect and worthy of being prepared to take a look at. And so that's what I want to share today. And in the conference book, there's a paper on page 125 that has some of these things and some stories related to some things. But I'm just going to take some of those points and kind of riff off of that a little bit, if you will. So the first thing that comes to mind here, I thought you put it up there, Ben. Sorry about that. There's this. Okay. So keep it real simple. So the first thing that we need to take a look at is staff. And it's about the adults. It's a statement that I get quite regularly. At the beginning of this work and this change process, many educators really start their journey by focusing on the students. And restorative practices is kind of at this stage of the journey is a discipline model, or it's another way to control. I don't want to really use that word, but to have students stay in their seats and do what they're told and to be decent with one another or whichever. And when educators look at it this way, so it's another discipline model. What happens if they have problems in the class is they say restorative practices doesn't work. Okay, I've tried it, there was a problem. They didn't do anything proactively. They didn't do any circles or anything along those lines. They just waited to a responsive situation, tried restorative practices, didn't get the outcome they were looking for, and just simply say, hey, it doesn't work. And this, we have really found out, it can be a significant cause of pushback, this needing to have this paradigm shift where you begin to go from it's about the students to it's about us as a staff, and it really is about the adults. And I've compared restorative practices implementation to kind of like having a healthy diet and exercising, regularly. Very few people will disagree with that concept, right? But not many want to do the work to get the benefits, and those are real issues. We say that kind of tongue in cheek and kind of joking about that hey, here's this great thing, and you should do this, and you should work forward and move forward and include this in what you do on a daily basis. But there's significant challenges that come up, and they're very real. And again, I said that kind of in a joking way, but there's a number of issues that kind of pop up. I'm going to get into that a little bit later, but just realizing that some of these struggles are there and to be prepared for it becomes really critical. What I think is a real important part at this point is helping people to make the jump or the segue or the shift from this discipline model or something that's about the kids to realizing that it is actually more closely a leadership model. Like what we as adults, as the adults in the building, as the educators, do in exercising our authority, how we go about doing the things that we do, how we exercise our authority, and really ultimately for educators, how we go about teaching and learning in the classroom, how we create the environment in a classroom to help students be successful and to help students achieve. That's what Restorative Practices is truly about in the classroom. And when everybody, all the staff, get on the same page and begin to realize that that really is what drives this work in schools, you begin to see some of those changes. For any of you who have been to any of the trainings, the professional development that we do, or have hung around with me for more than 5 minutes, you've probably heard the story already, but I think it's an interesting one. I was in a school that was actively and sincerely and doing a great job moving forward with the implementation, and I was walking down the hallway with the principal. And it was class time, so everybody was in there, was in the classes, and all of a sudden the door comes flying open. I was surprised that the glass didn't break, to be honest with you. And a student comes out and makes a sharp turn away from the way that we were walking. And so we kind of stop, and the student comes out and storms off this way. I don't know, 4 seconds afterwards, the door slams open again, and out comes the classroom teacher and turns and looking at the student walking away. I kid you not, this teacher yells, "Don't you come back until you're restored." Okay? All right. So, and again, bad person, bad teacher. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. What's going on there is, again, that shift is in the process of happening, right? So she's using some words. She's trying to get it going here. Okay, but still kind of viewing it as, this is something that we do to the kids, and kind of failing to see that it's about how I need to interact with this student who is struggling. And also that it's very much about repairing the harm that was done. And, that concept right there can also have some push-pull with it. If it's just a discipline thing, then, send them away, discipline them, whatever. And we all know what the data says related to that. It doesn't change behavior in any significant way. But when we begin to, as a staff, as an adult, as the team in the building, begin to realize that it's about repairing the harm that was done, then all of a sudden teachers begin to say, hey, well, wait a minute. If you're really being honest, and this is what we're doing here, then wasn't I harmed too? And the answer is absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. And so when they begin to view it that way, then they begin to see how they're part of this process as well, and how that translates back into the classroom. So the second one, and again, communication. It's going to get worse before it gets better. These are all things that people have said to me as they continue on their journey here. When people begin to realize that, hey, it's about the adults, okay? I like to say that there's no magic group of students who are waiting to come into our schools. Just get all the difficult ones out of the way, and then all of a sudden the magic students will arise, okay? No, that's not the way it works. These are our students. This is our community. They are us, okay? And so when they begin to realize that and begin to realize we have to communicate with one another, we have to support one another, people begin to get honest about what's going on. And with restorative practices, because it really fosters that enhanced open communication, okay, issues are going to pop up. And when we talk about it in our PD and we talk about the psychology of affect and what people need to function at their best, they need to be in an environment where it's free to express emotion, okay, where they can maximize positive affect, minimize the negative. That's probably very familiar to most of you here. But being in a situation or an environment or a culture where they, can actively and openly express feelings. So given that, and it only makes sense and it's not a problem, given that, there's going to be issues that crop up. Hey, you know what, last year? Hey, you know what, this year? Hey, how come this kid does that with you and does this with me? And what are you doing? And all of these types of things. Because, unfortunately, many people are kind of used to or maybe even expect kind of the toxic culture type of a thing. We buy into this mentality that we should just kind of stuff down our negative feelings or whatever it is, and that just leads to all kinds of behavior. Things come out sideways and passive aggressive and all of those types of things. So when people begin to realize that, hey, we can honestly communicate with one another, and we can honestly talk about what's working, we can honestly talk about what's not working, we can honestly talk about how your behavior impacted me, okay, again, those issues can arise. And I actually had a principal that shared that with me when it was actually an indication that their staff was doing a great job. And the principal said, hey, now all of a sudden now all these issues are popping up. I don't know if this is the right thing. I mean, maybe we're just, we're what's the word? What's the phrase? Let sleeping dogs lie or whatever that is. Maybe we should just, not touch it and let it be there. And, that's something that we would strongly encourage that you push through. You're going to have to address these issues. You're going to have to look right into the face of them and walk right through the center. Okay? And so be prepared for that and be ready to deal with that when they come up. That came out of a PD I was in. Got to trust the kids. And somebody said, you want me to do what? And which I thought was funny. And we talk about in the article that's in the book there about having fearless, positive regard for students, okay, and also for your colleagues as well, and that becomes critical to talk about. For a number of years prior to doing what I do in terms of the professional development for the IARP, I was a counselor and a principal in one of our alternative schools. And one of the things we said over and over again is that the students will rise to the level of our expectations, okay? And so they're going to do what we kind of put out there and hold before them and support them in being able to achieve. And so if we don't trust the kids, if we feel like really truly engaging with them or giving them a voice or giving them a say is going to lessen our authority, lessen our control, or whatever it might be, well, then we have low expectations and they'll rise to the level of our expectations, as high or as low as that might be. And I appreciate what Bruce said about the passion and the concern. And this is a piece for me, quite personally, that really drives and motivates the work that I do. When you give the students real opportunities to be truly engaged in all kinds of settings, and again, in our alternative school settings and so many of the inner city type of settings where some of those real issues and struggles, and in other settings that don't look like they have those types of struggles, even though in many ways they do. When you give them an opportunity to truly engage and to truly be a part of making significant decisions and to sharing how they're impacted by behavior and what their goals and their hopes and their dreams are, that again, they rise to the level of your expectations. And they oftentimes will say the things, as Stacy mentioned yesterday, they'll say the things that we would say, except it comes out of their mouths, right? And it has so much more power when it does that. So I have sat in circles in the alternative school, the example I'm thinking of right now, where I don't remember the size of the circle. I don't want to exaggerate it. So I don't know, maybe 15, 20 people or whatever. Where they sat there in a caring, loving, real, supportive way and addressed a student who had hygiene issues in an alternative school. And they sat there, and they were the most loving and supportive and caring. They actually made a decision to take money out of their own pockets to create a little kit for cologne and stuff like that, okay? Now, it got to the point where some of the students said, hey, can we dress this? Or the student himself said, I'm willing to talk to people about it. I was nervous, I was scared. I talked about some of the parameters, allowed it to happen, and it was one of the most eye-opening things I've ever experienced. Also had a situation where a student had a significant stuttering problem, and so would pass in the circle in class over and over again. And students said, hey, we want to talk to this student about us not hearing their voice. You're not answering. We want you to be a part of it. And so we want to hear your voice. And he said, oh yeah, but I stutter. We want to hear your voice. We want to hear you. And as they work together to have this student be an active part, it's unbelievable. And that's the type of fearless, positive regard I think becomes so critical for implementing this in schools. And also not in one of our alternative schools, a student, they were doing like a new game, a game where you had to kind of throw and catch, and there was a student there in a wheelchair with physical disabilities, and these students were wonderful in the way they included that person, including when the person made a throw that wasn't very good, you're out. I mean, it wasn't like they, just pushed all the rules aside, had different expectations, but still, was going to be a part of the game. And amazing what they will do. And you all know that, but just to continue to keep that in the forefront of people's minds. Well, here's what I really want to get to. This is really the main point of the presentation here. For adults to make this type of deep change in a building, in a school, in an organization, obviously we're talking about schools here, it really requires a unity of vision from the top. And I was talking with somebody earlier, and I'm in the very top. And I told this person, what I want to say is the tippy top, but I don't know if I can say that if it's not professional enough or whatever. But at the very top, okay. And how that's so critical. You can't delegate vision, and that has been one of the common struggles and difficulties that we've seen. And again, I get it. I understand building principles. You're dealing with, or they are dealing with, many, many different things. A lot being pulled in so many directions. Unbelievable. I routinely get emails from principals 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. I'm like, wow, what are you doing here? So obviously they're pulled in many different directions, and so they will assign the task of this change or leading this work to somebody else, to an assistant principal or to a teacher, and say, hey, this is a great idea. I'll give it the little brief stamp of approval at some staff meeting or something along those lines, but you take it and you run with it. And on paper, I guess it looks like maybe that should work, but our experience has been that it typically does not. And what we've really come to learn is because of the deep nature of the change that we're talking about in implementing restorative practices, because we're talking about the proactive creation of bonds and connections and relationships, and how much creativity that requires, and also how it faces us, how it causes us to face our own fears, our own issues of control and all of that. Because of that, we realize that this change is very deep, and it's very complex. And so what people will typically do is, instead of kind of doing this work or doing whatever, if there's some space between that individual and the person at the very top, they'll go in between there and kind of say, well, I don't know if I really need to do it, or whatever it is. And again, well-meaning people, but it gets uncomfortable, and then they kind of fall into some of those dynamics. And so we really talk about needing the top administration being on board and taking taking responsibility for being the head. When people, if you were to ask people in the school, whose baby is this? That's the phrase people, whose baby is this? That they point to the top administrator, that becomes critical. Now, can there be other folks that have certain aspects? Absolutely, and there needs to be. but it needs to be seen as an initiative that is coming from the very, very top. Part of that for administrators involves kind of walking the walk, okay, walking the talk, or talk whatever one that is, doing what you say, okay, and being willing to lead with vulnerability or authority with grace, as we talk about in the graduate school. In your interactions, using affective statements, which we talk about in our PD, and talking about how people's behavior impacted you and others, and being willing to do that. Being willing to sometimes publicly make apologies when you miss the mark, all right, and not viewing that as weak, but having the flat out guts to view that as strength, and to say, hey, this is what I'm expecting all of you to do. This is what we expect our children, our students to do. We need to model this ourselves. So having the courage to do that becomes so important. One thing that we have seen as well is, keeping an eye on the time here, number of schools have hired or given people like full-time restorative practices facilitator roles and all of that, which is, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's a horrible idea. It's a tricky in making sure that people understand that you can't just delegate your work. You can't just, not do the hard work, deal with the emotionality issues by giving it off to somebody else, okay, that it doesn't work that way. And kind of in going through this, we've come across, instead of calling them facilitators, it's more like a coach. And their job is to work with the teachers, the building, the teachers in the classroom, to help them do this work, and not to be the ones that do all the work with the students and their families, but that they support teachers in doing that. So it's a little, kind of nuance there, kind of playing with the words a little bit, but that those people who are responsible for helping people facilitate restorative practices or implement it are not the ones that are doing all the direct work with the students. So I kind of got into some of the leadership stuff there already, but some points on leadership, which is huge in what we're talking about with implementing and sustaining restorative practices. Seems kind of simple, but it's really important that all the adults are trained, and we do have a program, a whole school change program, Safer Saner Schools. We're not here to kind of plug that, but where the very first thing we do is to get people trained so that we're all on the same page. And there has been plenty of times where people will just train a few folks, but are expecting whole school culture change by just having a few people on board. Thought that maybe it would kind of, quite honestly, initially, we thought that ourselves, that it would kind of start to seep out and spread. We have found that that's not the case. You really need to get everybody on board right up front so you can begin to move forward. Oh, I had the wrong page up there. Sorry about that. All right, but I got my notes right. So that it be clear and consistently, the message is consistently put out that restorative practices is not an add-on. Okay, it's not something that we're doing in addition to teaching and learning, that it is actively a part of teaching and learning by using the circles, by proactively working to build connection and relationships and bonds, that is teaching. And so sometimes when we deal with this issue, when it comes up in PD, educators will say, when do I have the time to do this? And that's something you hear all the time. I don't have time to do this. When am I going to get the time to do this? And you have to be careful the way you roll this out. It can come across as being a bit snarky. But ask them, how much of your time right now is spent dealing with disruption? Okay? I mean, when we say we don't have the time for that, we're kind of starting from a presupposition of 100% of my time in a class is spent in deep academic pursuit. Okay? But then you talk, you say, oh, are you kidding me? 15 minutes every class period or whatever it is. And some data coming out around that, I've read a little bit where it's actually a little like 40%, 50%, they're, dealing with disruptions. And so, I just simply ask people, how much of your time is dealing with disruption? And, whatever they say, 10, 15, 20 minutes. I said, well, boom, now you have time to work on this, okay? See, what needs to shift is they're already doing this work, okay? They're already trying to engage and do these things. They're just using techniques that are not working for them, okay? So you're doing it already. Here's a way that you can do that, which has really been shown to lead to the outcomes that you're looking for. So again, keeping that message in terms of leadership, keeping that message in front of people on a regular basis to help them with that kind of paradigm shift. Just real quick, you've all seen the social discipline window, but that ties right in. This is how you exercise your authority and understanding that it truly is about how we as an authority create environments for teaching and learning to occur. Pressure is required. How do you, this becomes a real delicate balance, how do you have people begin to try this on and to take on in many ways a paradigm shift in a restorative way without kind of shoving it down their throats and no issues of union contracts and what's going to be evaluated, all of that comes in here. But the bottom line is as a leader in a building, as an administrator, as a leader, that you have a responsibility to set the vision, to set the climate, to say this is the way we're going to interact with one another, this is what it's going to look like here. And so at some point, you have to say, this is what we're doing. I wouldn't, suggest, obviously, first 2 days into it, if you don't do this, you're fired. We're not talking about that. But at some point, there needs to be some pressure to change. Again, the organizational change window, in the way that, leading change in an organization, this is about leadership, that if you just throw out a bunch of good ideas and without any pressure, that you're actually, in the 4 box, okay? And, the old drug and alcohol saying that most oftentimes people change not because they see the light, but because they feel the heat, okay? Ted's wife, Susan, who I haven't seen here today, said something to me years and years ago that I use a lot. Very few people woke up this morning and said, oh, if I can just have some painful personal growth today, it'll be a fantastic day. People don't say that, all right? So, but you got to push them into it. And so this balance of, yeah, I'm presenting this to you, here's some good ideas, but you know what? I want to really actively start to see this in the way that you interact with one another, the way that you interact with students, becomes the balance. Top administrator, okay, actively involved. I think I kind of hit that already. The staff opportunity to share learning and ask questions. Outside of training, this, I firmly believe, is like the biggest issue with sustaining implementation. Staff has to come together and talk about how it's going, share their experiences, okay? I don't want to say things too dramatically, but if I just want to do the training, but I'm not going to have any time to have any staff come and talk, don't waste your money on the training, okay? You have to come together and talk about this. It's a journey, and if people aren't sharing it with one another, if people aren't feeling free to talk about, celebrate what's going great, talk about what the struggles are and get some support, it's not going to go anywhere. This is very, very crucial and very, very important. Fairly recently, a school from Baltimore, it's in the article. The staff very used to doing regular circles, very used to coming together and talking with one another. It was the end of the year, and they were doing a go-around of like a highlight from the year. And people were going around in the circle, and it came to this one teacher, and she burst into tears. And she said that the principal had given her an unsatisfactory evaluation or an unsatisfactory review. Now, for those of you that are in schools in this room, you automatically say, maybe those of you who aren't may not quite follow, but you don't say that stuff in front of your peers in schools. Okay, you don't do that. She did. She felt comfortable enough to do that. And that in and of itself is impressive, but the response, I think, is even more impressive. There was a moment of silence as people sat there a little bit stunned. And then they began to talk about how they can support that teacher to grow in the particular areas and to be more successful next year. There was no complaining about the administration. There was no complaining about the district. There was no saying, yeah, get out of here, go to someplace else. They listened to her, they supported her, they encouraged her, and they helped her come up with plans on how she can be a better teacher next year. I can tell you a couple of things that I firmly believe. One, a teacher's going to have a better year next year, and in one sense, more importantly, kids are going to learn in that class and in that school. There's no doubt about it. So, again, leadership point, my final point here, need to model at all times as a leader, okay? Be relentless. There's a story in the book that I'm not going to go over now. I was going to, but I'm looking at the time here once again. So, Bethlehem area school district, our local school district here, where there was some seniors that did pranks and it spun out of control. And there was issues related to the staff, wanting to see them they were seniors, not walk in graduation and wanting them to be punished. But we're a restorative school. What does this look like? So the leader there, Principal Mike LaPorta, was very courageous in saying, we're going to have a conference on this. I want people to come to be a part of a meaningful experience, which is also part of what leaders need to do, create meaningful experiences for people so that they can feel the power of this, but was very courageous in moving forward, and then also saying they are going to walk. That's it, despite some people saying, we don't want to do that, he said they are, because they've done what they needed to do according to our climate here at the school. Very powerful, very courageous, but people really got on board following that. Using just a couple quick things here really quick. Using the question cards that we're all familiar with staff conflict. That becomes really critical, doing that on a regular basis. One question that I share with administrators all the time that I think is so powerful is in interacting with people, ask, why was that restorative? Many people will run around and say restorative, restorative, restorative. That's great, but why was that interaction or that intervention, why was that restorative? Let's talk about what it means to you. And that I've gotten feedback on has brought up all kinds of interesting discussions, as well as demonstrating people's gaps in knowledge. I have a number of principals who talked about using the social discipline window, which I just showed you, in supervision, helping people move through that. I think is a fantastic way to keep the vision and keep it in the front burner. Putting things into policy and procedures, courageously involving parents, and something as simple as staff meetings in circles on a regular basis. When they come together, they're used to it, giving people opportunities just to do a check-in on how they're doing. Again, to model that over and over again becomes a real critical component to sustaining restorative practices in a school. Had another thing that I was going to do, but I don't have time. So thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the conference.